Let's clarify this a little more. In my sense, it's pervasive, and it's not simply located within a physical body of a living being. It is throughout the universe. It's throughout, right here. It's just all around us. There is not only matter. There's not only the energy, the zero energy we were speaking about, but there is the energy of consciousness that's in that as well. And I'm wondering, is that congruent with your?
Well, I think we probably mean something different, slightly different, because I wouldn't say consciousness has an energy. I don't think it's so. And when you're saying consciousness, what are you meaning by consciousness here?
Well, it has to do with intuition, and it's both expressive and receptive. Receptively, it means like I can get an intuitive sense of the well-being of, let's say, a family member miles away. I can intuitively tune in and get a sense of that. Expressively, that's where we move into the realm of what's called psychokinesis, mind manifesting in matter, the ability of our consciousness to actually move and touch the world. It could be in physical ways, it could be in healing modalities. But that's the kind of dynamic interaction that I see in the field qualities of consciousness.
Okay. So what I think what you're talking about for me are particular ways in which consciousness, or particular things which appear in consciousness. So for me, an intuition or something is another experience arising in the mind, something else we are conscious of. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I think, we have slightly different views on consciousness, and so do other people. I think this is really important, because in any discussion you see people talking or they end up arguing, and they don't realize they're actually using words in slightly different ways, and as we are with consciousness. And that's really important, whether it's consciousness or mind or other things, or you mentioned the word God earlier. I'm sure if we explored what you meant by God and what I meant by it, we'd have very different opinions. There's probably 6 billion different opinions on the planet. So I think it's really important to just get down to what we mean by words.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, anything more about science that we might explore?
Well, I think, what I was talking about of consciousness being universal, obviously science does not see that. The current scientific worldview is that consciousness somehow, we don't know how, arises out of the brain.
Right.
And I think the brain is clearly involved in the experiences we have.
Yes.
And I would say probably there's a 100% one-to-one correlation. What we experience has a corresponding state of brain. But I don't think the brain generates the capacity for experience.
I agree.
But most scientists would. But so I think that's the fundamental difference. And what we're talking about is what a lot of spiritual traditions say, that ultimately mind, consciousness is universal and is the basis of the cosmos.
Yes.
And some scientists see that. In fact, if you go back just 100 years, the beginning of what we call modern physics, quantum theory, you find a lot of those physicists were very interested in spirituality and came to these very same conclusions.
That's right.
That famous one by James Jeans, I think the universe is not like a machine, one big machine so much as like one big mind.
The more it's like a great thought.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And Eddington, who did a lot of work on relativity, and he said, the science is the study of mind. Actually, he said the ultimate nature of the universe is mind stuff. It's not physical stuff. It's mind stuff.
Yes.
And so it's interesting that they were thinking of this, but then I think we've got so caught up in the scientific material worldview in the last 30, 40, 50 years, we've forgotten these other possibilities.
So powerful. We've accomplished so much with the power of science. The sort of materialistic hard science that says it's mostly dead matter and empty space, that has accomplished so much that we've forgotten really where it's anchored, its foundations. Yeah. And if we go to the foundations of science, as we've been exploring here, at the foundations, it's a universe of non-locality. It's a unified universe, a universe of immense amounts of energy flowing through it, a universe of intuitively interconnected with itself. So the fundamentalism of science that says it's mostly dead matter and empty space is now being transformed by the tools of science itself. And I find that just delicious.
I think there's a huge revolution happening or about to happen, because there's so many things that don't quite fit in modern science. It's a bit like we were 500 years ago before Copernicus. There was a lot that didn't fit in the way the stars moved, and then Copernicus came along, we had this whole revolution. I think we're on the edge of a much, much bigger revolution, and there's so many things we don't understand. I think there's going to be a big shake-up in that.
Yeah. Do you want to hint at that revolution that you're seeing?
Yes, my suspicion is it's going to include consciousness and the mind in some way. I don't know how, but I think,
Yeah.
you see, at the moment science has excluded consciousness, and I think for apparently good reasons. You know, we can't measure it, we can't measure consciousness. Science wants to be objective, and consciousness is very subjective. And the universe seems to, or did seem to, work perfectly well without studying consciousness, and so it's ignored consciousness. But the sort of paradox here, or the irony, is that all science takes place in the mind. All science is an activity happening in consciousness, and it's conscious observers playing around with ideas. That's the real tool of science, and yet science can't even
Yes.
include that.
Yeah. Now, I want to take issue with the one thing that you said.
Yeah.
You said that consciousness cannot be measured.
Yeah.
And I had this rare opportunity to spend almost 3 years at the SRI International, this think tank, as a subject exploring our intuitive connections with reality and with some of the finest instrumentation available. And after 3 years of work, I came to the conclusion that we do have a direct and substantial interaction happening all the time with the rest of the world around us. That it isn't simply that we're physical beings locked into a physical body. We are actually, the body is a convenient locus for a much larger being that we are, which is our extended capacity for consciousness, if you will. But that capacity for consciousness in the laboratory can be measured. And so,
Can it?
Well, the effects of consciousness can be measured. The consequences can be measured.
But yes. Or I think there's lots of things we can measure. We can measure how we're experiencing, and that's what a lot of psychology does. And I think the boundaries of psychology are pushing out. But I don't think the capacity for experience itself it's the one thing we all know for sure, is that we are aware, and I don't think that can be measured.
Yeah, that's just direct.
That in itself, and that again, I think is how I'm using consciousness.
Yeah.
I think is beyond all measurement, because what we measure are the experiences that appear in consciousness. We can measure those and how we interact. But the very fact that we are aware, that pure awareness, I think is not a thing. I actually think we mislead ourselves by using the word consciousness. As soon as we put ness on a word, like blueness or something, we're turning an adjective into a noun. And I think it's conscious is the adjective, is what we should be looking at, to say I am conscious. When we make it into a noun, we actually start taking ourselves off a bit. And I think that's part of the problem these days. So, I'd like to ban the word consciousness and talk about being conscious. Yeah.
Being conscious. Can we start now kind of looking underneath the fundamentalism of religion to maybe some of the common ground there it shares with science?
Yeah. Yep. And I also want to come back to spirituality as well.
Please, go ahead.
I mean, we can do both. But I think spirituality is about how we can improve the quality of our life. And I think this is what the great spiritual teachers have been talking about. We would take Buddha or any other great teacher. I think they all see that we suffer unnecessarily, and that part of the reason we suffer is because we got caught in a belief system, a mindset, whether it's a scientific mindset. But we don't realize we're creating discontent for ourselves, we're creating pain for ourselves. And so I think ultimately spirituality is a psychology. It's a very, very profound psychology about the nature of the human mind and how we get ourselves caught. And spiritual practices, as I see them, are ways of freeing ourselves, freeing the mind, freeing our being, so that we can actually be more at peace and more at ease. And I think if there's one sort of universal thing that comes out of all the different spiritual traditions, and that is they say that ultimately we have that inside us. We have that quality of peace, ease, the love we're all looking for. That is actually our essential nature, but we're so busy looking out there And we get so busily caught up in our thinking and worrying and all that stuff and our daily activity. We don't notice these subtler qualities of being.
Yes. Now let's is the essential nature of, let's say, a settled quietude, a settled soulfulness, a part of our biological existence, or is that a fundamental quality of the universe in a way that we can relax into it?
The way I see it, I think it's the fundamental nature of consciousness in all beings. I think when a being isn't under threat, when it's in a relaxed state, its consciousness is in a relaxed state, and so it experiences itself being at ease. And I think that's what I call natural mind. It's it's the natural state of mind, the untroubled state of mind, and it's just being in the moment. And I would say in that state, there's probably not even a sense of I or self or ego. But when the mind starts reflecting upon itself and it starts tightening up a bit, then we get this, we fall out of that natural ease. So I would, whether it's, you said, if we say consciousness goes all the way down to an atom, I'm not sure an atom is aware enough to be aware of feeling at ease. I think that comes, that ability to reflect upon consciousness, I think comes with the higher mammals. So, but I don't know. Again, it's probably because we're using consciousness in slightly different ways.
Yeah. Well, all right. Now, as we look at this, where can we find the common ground between these two seemingly separate systems? What do you see as the meeting place?
I see. First of all, I mean, I don't see an easy meeting between sort of dogmatic fundamentalist religion of whatever type and sort of the rigid science. Right. I don't see a meeting there.
Right.
What I do see, though, is that spirituality, in the sense of how can we understand ourselves and improve our quality of life and be more loving and compassionate, is the other side of what science is trying to do. Science has the goal of how can life be made better?
Right.
How do we apply science? We apply it to making life better in one way or another. It doesn't always work, but that's our goal. And so I see there are two sides of the same thing. Science is looking at that from an external point of view, how we can manage the material world better so that we can feel better. And I see basically spirituality is looking at how can we manage ourselves, how can we manage our minds better so that we can feel more at ease. So I see them as complementary, two different approaches to really the same underlying goal of how do we make life better?
How do we live at ease in a living universe?
Yeah.
Pete, thank you for the conversation. Enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
If our viewers have any comments or contributions to the show, we welcome them. Thanks for having us.